Hello everyone and welcome to How Is This Movie? My name is Dana Buckler and thank you for taking just a little time out of your day to listen. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at How Is This Movie, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/HowIsThisMovie. You can always reach out to me with questions or comments at hitmpodcast@gmail.com. And if you're enjoying this show, please take a moment to rate and review us on whatever platform you choose to listen to us on. When I was in high school, I went with some friends to see a movie called Billy Madison. The film starred SNL alumni Adam Sandler. Sandler was now embarking on a film career, and as I sat through that movie, I clearly remember thinking to myself, this is awful. There were a few laughs sporadically throughout the film, but I walked out of the theater very disappointed. I didn't like the character Sandler played in Billy Madison. Now, I know that I may be in a select group here, because the film has garnered a somewhat strong following. So when the next Sandler film came out, Happy Gilmore, I reluctantly traveled to the theater with my friends and went in with very low expectations. And to my surprise, I actually enjoyed the movie. The character of Happy Gilmore, although somewhat dim-witted, was a much more likable character than that of Billy Madison. It was at that point that I made a decision to only see Adam Sandler films using what I then dubbed the idiot scale. If in the trailer for an upcoming Adam Sandler film, his character was at or above Happy Gilmore, I would see the film. If his character was a complete moron, as in Billy Madison, or even worse, below that, I would pass on seeing the film. I know. I have some of the strangest movie rules, and those rules have only gotten worse and more absurd as I've gotten older. So in early 1998, I was sitting in a theater and a trailer for Adam Sandler's next movie, The Waterboy, came on. And oh my, did that movie look awful. It took all of 20 seconds for me to make a mental note that this was a film that I was not going to see in theaters, or if at all. So on Friday, November 6th, 1998, I lined up at the theater box office and walked up to the window and said the following. 1 for the 7:05 showing of The Waterboy. Now what? Why on earth, after everything I just told you, would I be buying a ticket to that movie? Well, the answer may surprise you. I bought a ticket for one reason and one reason only, and it wasn't because I was a huge football fan. I bought a ticket to see the first teaser trailer for Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. This may sound odd to some of you, but remember, this was 17 years ago. Technology as we know it just didn't exist. There wasn't a way to watch the trailer 100 times online. Sure, maybe I could spend 6 hours downloading it over a dial-up connection to watch a postage-size QuickTime video, but a theater ticket was only $6. So to me, it was worth it. And in case you're wondering, yes, I left the theater after the trailer was over. I wasn't alone. Movie theaters around the country saw a massive spike in ticket sales that weekend. The trailer also debuted in front of Meet Joe Black. And statistics have shown that the majority of ticket purchasers for Meet Joe Black that weekend were males between the age of 18 and 24. Hardly the typical audience one would expect for a movie like that. So how did I like the trailer? I didn't like it. I loved it. I was and still am a huge Star Wars fan. And they made one hell of a good teaser trailer. As the hype machine went into overdrive over the next 6 months leading up to the film's release, you couldn't escape the Phantom Menace. It seemed like every company in the world had some type of marketing campaign set up with Lucasfilm. I remember going to Taco Bell 4 times in 1 week just to get one of those damn collectible cups they were selling. And like millions of other Star Wars fans, I bought my tickets in advance and waited what seemed like forever for the film's 1999 release. But let me come back to that release in just a moment. The original Star Wars film came out in 1977, and it took the world by storm. It not only became the highest-grossing movie of all time, but also a pop culture phenomenon. Now, if you were one of the lucky ones to see Star Wars in the theater back in 1977, then you will recall that when the opening title crawl came on the screen, it didn't say Episode 4. It just said Star Wars: A New Hope. This was because this movie was originally planned to be a standalone film. Think about it for a moment. The story has a beginning, middle, and end. There's even a medal ceremony. And viewers left the theater satisfied that the story had been told. No one, including George Lucas, had planned for the overwhelming reaction the film would receive. So naturally, after it became the biggest thing ever, a sequel was demanded by the studio. And everyone was asking Lucas, when is Star Wars 2 coming out? Now think about what I just said there. Star Wars 2. Again, this was not a planned trilogy. So when Lucas began writing the script for the second Star Wars film, he played around with a few ideas. One idea that received a lot of traction was that Luke's father, Anakin, would appear in a ghost form and help train Luke to become a Jedi. It was while writing a treatment for this idea that Lucas shifted gears to the idea that Darth Vader was once a proud member of the Jedi Council, and that Vader was the one who killed Luke's father, Anakin. This is mentioned in the first Star Wars film, when Obi-Wan explains to Luke that a young pupil of his betrayed and murdered his father.
How did my father die? a young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father. Now the Jedi are all but extinct. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
Lucas then made a decision to turn Vader into Anakin Skywalker and came up with one of the most jaw-dropping was just as big, if not bigger, than the original Star Wars. But one thing was clearly different from this film. It ends on a down note and leaves the door wide open for what would become the third and final movie of the Star Wars saga, Revenge of the Jedi. And you heard me right when I said Revenge of the Jedi. The title was changed just weeks before the film's release. He changed the title because a Jedi would never take revenge. Now, like the two previous Star Wars films, Jedi was a massive hit and also a fitting end to the saga. Lucas would return to the Star Wars universe in a few made-for-TV projects in the 80s, with Ewoks, Caravan of Courage, and the surprisingly violent Ewoks The Battle for Endor. Both, I might add, are in their entirety on YouTube. There's also two cartoons, one called Droids, one called Ewoks. I don't think they made it past a season. But in Lucas's mind, the story of Star Wars was over and had been told, and he would constantly shrug off suggestions that he should continue the story with either prequels or sequels to the franchise. Now, this may surprise you to hear, but Lucas wouldn't sit in the director's chair after making the first Star Wars film for almost 20 years. He would spend the majority of the 1980s and the 1990s in a producer's role, overseeing films like Howard the Duck, Willow, Labyrinth, and the Indiana Jones franchise. Some of you may not be aware of this, but Lucas didn't direct Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. Rather, he oversaw every aspect of the film's development and felt that he would better serve the overall picture by bringing in accomplished and competent directors to handle the filming aspects. Another point I need to bring up is that the special effects company that Lucas founded in 1975, Industrial Light and Magic, or ILM, handled the special effects for the first three Star Wars films and would go on to become the foremost effects company in the film industry, and still to this day is the leader in pioneering new technology for the movies. ILM would play a major role in Lucas's decision to revisit the Star Wars universe. By the early 90s, Lucas couldn't escape the overwhelming popularity of Star Wars. It just seemed to get bigger every year. It was always the first topic of conversation whenever he was interviewed about other projects he was involved in. And in 1993, he shocked the world when he announced that he would be moving forward on his plans to create a prequel trilogy that would focus on the story of how Anakin Skywalker would become Darth Vader. The world let out a collective roar of excitement, and in 1994, he began the writing process.
When I finished the first trilogy, I figured that was the end of Star Wars. That's what I set out to do, and I finished it. And at that time, I was a new father, and I had just been divorced. And I was sort of determined that what I was going to do is stop everything and raise my daughter. So I changed my life goals at that point, and produced a few films and ran the companies that I had and did a TV series which I enjoyed, and generally just did things that were less stressful than actually directing a movie. Then I reached a point where my son, after adopting two more kids, my son was old enough, he was about 5 years old, that I thought I could go back and direct again. And so then I was sort of faced with this decision about what I was going to do. Was I going to go back and finish the kinds of movies and do the kinds of movies that I had started out doing, which was sort of the where I would have gone if I hadn't gone to American Graffiti, and if I'd continued the THX idea, the sort of San Francisco avant-garde scene, the more pure cinema, the more visually oriented kinds of films. Or would I go back at that point and finish Star Wars, do this backstory, which I never really intended to do, and wasn't written as a movie, and which technically couldn't be done when I finished Return of the Jedi. But now, 15 years later, I had the technology. ILM had developed digital technology to a point after Jurassic Park that I could actually consider doing some of the things that were thought about in the backstory. And so I said, well, do I finish Star Wars or do I go off and do these other things? I knew if I went off and did these other things, I'll probably never go back to Star Wars, and that would be the end of it. But in the end, I said it would be an interesting challenge to take the medium into this adventure land of pushing it in ways that hadn't been done, that I'd been wanting to do in the first ones, to be able to have the medium meet my imagination. Because the medium, when you're doing science fiction and fantasy films, you're always bumping up against the technology. All art is technology, and all artists eventually end up pushing against that technology, whether it's needing to develop a new red or a new blue, or invent oils and canvases to get off the back wall of the church, and you're always sort of faced with some kind of constraint that holds you back. And I knew if I were to go back and do the next Star Wars trilogy, that I'd really have to make some leaps technologically to get the job done. And I really, in the end, wanted to see that story told, and I really wanted to. I liked the story of Darth Vader, and I thought this will be fun, because this will be doing the Star Wars that I did before, only without all the frustration of bumping into the technology.
Around the same time Lucas began writing the script for the still untitled Episode 1, he began a producing partnership with Rick McCullum, an up-and-coming young producer who worked on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. The two became fast friends, and when 20th Century Fox approached Lucas regarding the 20th anniversary of the release of Star Wars to see if Lucas wanted to re-release the film in theaters to celebrate the milestone, Lucas and McCullum came up with the idea to not only release the trilogy in theaters, but also enhance the films, and really test out the latest technology that ILM had to offer. Lucas also stated that he felt the technology had finally caught up enough for him to add the effects that he wasn't able to add in 1977. The special editions, as they would become to be known, caught everyone by surprise. Nowadays, nothing is a secret. Thanks to social media, we pretty much get every plot detail and character spoiled for us months before a movie comes out. But back in 1996, when I saw the trailer for these special editions, I was super excited. For one, I'd never seen Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back on the big screen. I did see Jedi in '83 in the theater, but let's be honest, I was 5 years old at the time. I was pretty amped about rewatching the trilogy in theaters, and ILM had some amazing breakthroughs in the 90s. I mean, think about it. Jurassic Park came out in '93, blew everyone away with the CGI rendered dinosaurs on the screen. So I was on board with Lucas's decision to add some new shots to the film. Well, at least I thought I was. Let's take a minute and talk about my first viewing of Star Wars Special Edition. First, the good. The movie sounded amazing. They had given the entire sound a complete THX makeover. And in the theater, it sounded like TIE fighters and X-Wings were buzzing all around your head. And the film, for the most part, looked great. Having never seen it in a widescreen format or on the big screen, this special edition gave me a new appreciation for just how awesome the movie itself is. The trouble, or the bad, that I ran into with the special edition was the, quote, new effects that were added to the movie. Even by 1990s technology, I thought they looked cheap and out of place. Wait a second, this is the same company that did stunning Jurassic Park dinosaurs? What was going on? There's one that really sticks out to me, and that is where Han Solo has a run-in with Jabba the Hutt. Ugh. If you've seen this scene, then you have to agree that it's just terrible. When it was originally filmed in 1976, Jabba was played by a human actor with the intention that Lucas would use some type of stop-motion animation overlapping the actor.
Solo! Come out of there, Solo! Solo!
Right here, Jabba. Been waiting for you.
Have you not?
You didn't think I was going to run, did you?
Ah, my boy, there are times you disappoint me. Why haven't you paid me? And why did you have to fry poor Greedo like that, after all we've been through together?
Look, Jabba, next time you want to talk to me, come see me yourself. Don't send one of these twerps.
Han, understand. I just can't afford to make exceptions. Where would I be if every pilot who smuggled for me dropped his consignment at the first sign of an Imperial starship? It's not good business.
Look, Jabba, even I get boarded sometimes.
Eventually, it was decided to scrap the scene when budget constraints wouldn't allow for the shot to be finished. So when Jabba the Hutt is revealed in Return of the Jedi, he is a fully formed character, controlled by multiple puppeteers, and truly one of the great creatures of the Star Wars universe. Another major contention in the special edition, which has been talked about to death, is the infamous Han shot first scene. In the 1977 version, after we first meet Han Solo, he has a run-in with a bounty hunter named Greedo. The two are sitting at the table in the cantina, and there's some back and forth between the two of them. Han Solo owes Jabba a very large sum of money for a smuggling operation that went awry. Greedo's plan is to take Solo back to Jabba and collect the bounty on his head. It's during this tense scene that we see Solo slowly reach for his blaster and shoot Greedo mid-sentence, killing him instantly. Solo was cold and calculated during that scene. And as a viewer, you quickly understood that Han Solo was not someone to be taken lightly. Now in the special edition, the scene is changed to Greedo now firing first, and Han shooting at him in self-defense, effectively changing the whole perspective of Solo's character. There was an outrage over this, and almost 20 years later, it's hotly debated among die-hard fans. Over the next couple of months, I would also watch special editions of Empire and Jedi, and although Empire also received a major cosmetic overhaul, thankfully, there were not that many added scenes that changed the arc of any of the characters. Now, when it comes to the special edition of Return of the Jedi, particularly the first scene that takes place at Jabba's palace, well, my jaw was on the floor in disbelief with what I was seeing. Palace was now littered with poorly animated CGI characters. Now, originally in 1983, Jabba had, for a lack of a better term, a house band. These were all practical effects creatures that were controlled by puppeteers, and there's a small musical number that they perform. It lasts for about a minute and a half, and here's a small sample of that music. In the scene, there's a slave girl who's dancing to the musical number, and she is abruptly tossed into the Rancor pit and meets a very untimely demise. Now, in the special edition, we get a completely new song performed by a mostly CGI band. This entire scene was purposely filmed for the special edition. Now, I'm not going to try to defend the original song, it's quirky, but up against this new song, it's a masterpiece. The whole thing is goofy and silly. I was in the theater, face in my hands, shaking my head, thinking to myself, what the hell is going on here? Other changes included the Sarlacc pit, which now had a Venus flytrap type of character that came out of the ground, which I add was again a poorly rendered CGI effect. As we move into the second and third act of the film, thankfully things ease back into a more tolerable viewing experience. Then we get to the end of the film. After the rebels destroy the Death Star, there's a celebration on the moon of Endor. Again, the music was completely changed. Instead of that lovable Ewok song, we We instead get a new composition composed by John Williams. Now, admittedly, this new piece of music is good, and instead of a celebration just on Endor, we get scenes of celebration from around the galaxy, including our first look at Coruscant, a planet that will be critical to the story arc of the upcoming prequels. All told, the special edition releases of the original trilogy brought in millions and millions of dollars during their limited theatrical release, and for the most part, people would downplay the shoddy visuals that were added to the films. Why, you might ask? Well, because now it's 1998, and the word is out. There's going to be a new Star Wars movie in less than a year, and the excitement grew. I was part of the hysteria. I was all in. And after I watched the teaser for the first time, I was hooked. As were most of us. Listen to some of the reactions of people after seeing the first teaser for The Phantom Menace.
Starting Friday, thousands of theaters around the country began showing a new 2-minute trailer for what can possibly be described as the most eagerly awaited new movie of the decade.
2 words: Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Movie fans lined up
Just to see the trailer.
The Hollywood Reporter says at LA's Mann's Chinese Theater, attendance shot up 1,100% the night they ran a sneak preview of this Star Wars trailer.
I think I might leave after the trailer, though. I don't know.
You actually paid to go in to see a movie just to see the trailer, and then you left?
Yes. Because it's an awesome 2.5 minutes.
That was incredible. There was nothing, ever, anything like that.
Oh my God!
I welled up. I haven't welled up in years.
I just had a heart attack.
I think God must be ashamed as a creator. Once he saw the preview for this movie and realized he hasn't made something this good.
This is going to be something I'll remember and tell my children. It's wonderful. I know, I sound crazy.
Again, I stress I was right there with them. I saw the trailer once, and it was burned into my mind. 2 weeks before Episode 1's release, I bought 2 tickets to the midnight showing on May 18th, 1999. The other ticket was for my friend Joey, who was just as excited as I was. But I also bought a ticket for a showing the next day. In my mind, I was going to see this film at least 5 times in the theater. There was one more order of business I needed to take care of. I needed the day off from work. Now, for those who work or have worked in the restaurant business, taking a Friday off is not the easiest proposition. And since I couldn't keep my mouth shut about how excited I was to see this movie, everyone knew that's why I was asking for the day off. A week before the movie's release, I sat down in the restaurant's back office with my general manager. I laid it out for him. Look, I really need this day off, and I'm willing to work extra time or whatever the restaurant needs me to do. Sensing my desperation, my manager smiled and said, "Well, Dana, I may be able to work something out. You see, Perry, our longtime dishwasher, needs 3 days off the following week. And if you're willing to sub for him, I will gladly give you this Friday off." Is that it, I thought? Ha! No problem. Deal, I told him. And with that, I had my date with destiny set. Nothing was going to stop me from seeing Episode 1. On Thursday, May 18th, I arrived at the multiplex around 8 p.m. And to no surprise, the lines had already begun to form. I looked at Joey and said, "Look, man, waiting in line is all part of the experience. And this is something we'll be talking about for years." Joey rolled his eyes. You see, he had other ideas. There was an Applebee's restaurant in the same plaza, and he asked me if I wanted to grab a few beers before the movie starts. No way, I told him. I didn't want my brain polluted, my vision slightly distorted from my first time seeing the most anticipated film of all time. Joey smiled and said, "Okay, man, save me a seat." And off he went. Now, I live in a normal-sized town in Florida, population about 50,000, and I remember recognizing a lot of people from town in that line. The next 3.5 hours were filled with lengthy discussions about the original trilogy, and we all gathered around one gentleman who told tales of seeing the first Star Wars in Los Angeles opening weekend 77. I struck up conversations with complete strangers, theorizing about what we thought the plot would be. Looking back on it, I really did have a great time waiting in line. At 11:30, the usher walked up to the velvet rope that was blocking the entrance to the theater, and he grabbed the right side of the rope and removed it, clearing the way to the theater. A cheer erupted in the line, and we made our way in. I found 2 seats in the middle, halfway up, and to this day I've never seen a theater get so packed so quickly. Joey stumbled his way into the theater around 11:45. I had to stand up and wave my arms for him to finally see me. When he sat down, the smell of cheap beer was overwhelming. I looked at him kind of puzzled and said, "How many did you have?" He replied, 5 or 6. I was like, "Jesus, man." I said, "You know how many times you're going to have to go to the restroom?" "I can hold it," he proclaimed. At midnight, the lights dimmed and another roar came across the theater. We were then treated to at least 8 trailers, of which Joey made 2 restroom trips. As the last trailer ended, the lights got darker, then you heard the oh-so-familiar drums and overture of the 20th Century Fox logo. Then comes the Lucasfilm logo. Then a black screen. Silence for just a moment. The next image on screen read, "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." And wait for it. Bam. The Star Wars logo erupts on the whole screen. The crowd goes crazy. There were chills running through my whole body. For a brief moment, everything was great. I made it. I was witnessing a new Star Wars movie, and the feeling was glorious. Then the movie started.
The opening scroll, and everyone's freaking out.
And it's like, this is incredible. I mean, whoever thought this day was going to come?
And that was one of the great moments of anybody's movie-going life.
Then the movie starts.
Already I knew. It's like just the language of the crawl was wrong. It just didn't feel right. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to stay with it, you know.
It went from this glow up here in your heart, and then it descended. And then it went down, and then it just sat here, right?
And I just remember, thinking, "Oh my God, is it really this? Is it actually this bad?"
It just felt like being slapped in the face with a wet fish.
It was like, what? This could suck?
I'm starting to deflate a little bit, but, I'm still at Star Wars. It's going to, okay, Jedi, it's not great, but, whatever. It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
What I was used to seeing, from watching the originals in theaters were people cheering, there's big applause moments, big laughs. This was literally an almost like silent screening.
Maybe it was something different. Maybe we didn't see that. Maybe this is a Star Wars film that we need to watch again.
That was the first time in my life that a movie has ever properly disappointed me and gutted me to the point where I had to lie about my feelings to save face.
I mean, I even remember interviews on the local news, and they're all saying, well, yeah, but we're going back again tomorrow. There was still a hope, and I don't think it really sunk in for everybody until they saw it that second time, because everybody saw it a second time. We all saw it again.
It only took about 15 minutes for me to realize that there was something very wrong. And of the many issues I had, the most glaring right away was the CGI effects. This didn't look like a Star Wars film I was used to seeing. This was a digital Star Wars. This was a CGI love fest. Frankly, nothing looked real. Now, at the time I was watching it, I tried to trick myself into thinking that the effects were passable. I kept saying to myself, just focus on the characters. Follow the story. But the story was flat. It didn't have the magic I was hoping for. And as for the characters, they were wooden and lacking depth and emotion. And since many of these actors in the movie, including Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, and Samuel L. Jackson, are very good actors, the fault can't lie with them. They were following the direction of George Lucas. Now, putting the bad CGI effects, the actors clearly following bad direction, and the plot of the movie being extremely convoluted, there really are 2 main reasons I don't like this movie. There are 2 reasons why the movie is ruined for me. 2 reasons I cannot and will not ever recommend this film: Jar Jar Binks and Anakin Skywalker. Now, talking about young Anakin for a moment, the character was so poorly represented in The Phantom Menace, and he carried some of the most cringeworthy dialogue throughout the film, that even the first time I was watching it, I was shaking my head.
Look! There they are! That's where the autopilot's taking us! This is tense! R2, get us off this autopilot! It's gonna get us both killed! You did it, R2! Okay, let's go left! Go back? Qui-Gon told me to stay in this cockpit, so that's what I'm gonna do. I'll try spinning, that's a good trick. I know we're in trouble, just hang on! We're hit, R2!
Now, when it comes to Jar Jar, I mean fuck. What do I need to say that hasn't already been said?
No, Mr. Stay! Mr. called Jar Jar Binks. Mr. your humble servant. Excuse me, but the most safest place would be Gonga City. It's where I grew up. 'Tis a hidden city.
I will sum up his entire character into this. The Star Wars films have always had an element of comedy, with most of it being clever and witty dialogue. Jar Jar brings a new level of slapstick that, if done in very small doses, may have warranted a laugh or two. But Jar Jar is fumbling and slipping on banana peels throughout the movie. Even when we get to the epic end battle, and I say that with air quotes, Jar Jar is still falling on his ass. If Jar Jar's character would have evolved by the time we got to that battle and turned into a brave warrior, I believe that some of his antics may have been forgiven. Now, all is not lost in the Phantom Menace. The final lightsaber battle is pretty damn good, but honestly, it's too little too late. When the movie was over, Joey got up and ran out of the theater, knocking people over on his way to try to get to the nearest restroom. I was still sitting in my seat, sort of zoning out during the end credits. Occasionally, I would look around the theater, and I saw several people just sitting there. I can only assume that they were thinking the same thing I was. What just happened? I got up, walked into the lobby, and immediately ran into Joey. We didn't say anything. We both just headed for the exit doors. There was a deafening silence amongst a crowd of nearly 300 people. When we got to Joey's car, again, without saying anything, we both got in, he turned the key, and we drove off. Now, in the town where I live, there's a 24-hour mom-and-pop's restaurant that Joey and I would traditionally visit after watching a big movie event. We had planned to do the same after Star Wars. I finally broke the silence and mumbled, "You know, you can just drop me off at my house. It's late." Joey replied, "Yeah, that's cool, man." Once I got to my house, I was still trying to decompress from what I had seen. It took me a while to get to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, and my phone began to ring and ring and ring. I was getting a barrage of phone calls from friends who wanted the 411 on the new Star Wars. Now here's where things get a little interesting. I didn't have the heart to tell my friends how I really felt. The Star Wars universe is a magical place, and I couldn't be the one to tell them that the universe is now gone. Just like I would never tell a child the truth about Santa Claus. I couldn't tell the truth in this case. I lied. I said I liked it. I think somewhere deep inside I was trying to convince myself that it was a good movie, that my expectations had been so high that I would have never been satisfied. Now keep this in mind. It's Friday, and I have another ticket to see this movie again. When I got to the theater, it was twice as crowded as the night before. This time everyone was dressed up as Star Wars characters. The energy was electric, and as I stood there in another 2-hour line, this time I was quiet. Instead of engaging in conversations, I just listened. Listened to the people in line talk about how excited they were. Even though this was a new group, the conversation was the same. People trying to piece together what they thought the plot details were, and I just stood there. There was a part of me that wanted to scream, "You're wrong. You're all wrong. It's not what you think. It's not good." But I kept quiet. Just like the night before when the Star Wars logo comes across the screen, the crowd cheered. I did not. The first time a lightsaber was ignited, the crowd cheered. I did not. And by the 30-minute mark, there was an eerie quiet over the crowd, as if all of a sudden they knew what I knew. I stayed until the end of the pod race, and then I was gone. I learned a harsh lesson from that movie. In a way, looking back, I'm glad it wasn't good, because it taught me to never throw blind trust behind a filmmaker or a movie. Sometimes they don't get it right. And if you taper your expectations, then hopefully you'll enjoy a great movie even that much more. Now, I could spend the next 20 minutes going over episodes 2 and 3, but honestly, what's the point? I had very similar experiences. Yes, I went to midnight releases on both of those films, and yes, I tapered expectations, and yes, both of those movies severely disappointed me. In the years following 2005, the Star Wars movies for me were broken up into 2 categories. The light side, which is the original trilogy, and the dark side, the prequel trilogy. In late 2011, it was announced that all 6 Star Wars films were going to be re-released in 3D, starting with Episode 1, all the way through Return of the Jedi. The idea intrigued me, and in February 2012, I bought a ticket to see Episode 1 in 3D. It was the Monday after its initial weekend release, and strangely, I was the only one in the theater. I made it through 30 minutes of the movie before I walked out. 3D or no 3D, this movie sucks. I remember shaking my head all the way back to the car and thinking, you just wasted $25 on a ticket and concessions. I made a decision to wait until they released episodes 4, 5, and 6 before they were going to get my money again. But that didn't happen. They didn't release any more films in 3D because that same year, Disney would buy Lucasfilm from George Lucas for a reported $4 billion. And Disney had a plan in place, and that plan was to distance themselves as far away from the prequels as possible. They immediately shut down the 3D re-releases and moved forward on plans for a new trilogy. So in 2012, there was an awakening, and I felt it. It should be noted that Lucas was brought on board as a consultant to help the new writers understand the Star Wars universe. But in what could only be described as the ultimate slap in the face, when George Lucas turned over to Disney his script ideas for episodes 7, 8, and 9, Disney executives slid them right back to him, effectively saying, "Thank you, George, but we'll take it from here."
Star Wars fans this morning are less than a month from the premiere of Episode 7, The Force Awakens. This is the first sequel George Lucas is not intimately involved in. Lucas opens up to Vanity Fair magazine about why he will no longer direct Star Wars movies. He says, quote, "You go to make a movie and all you do is get criticized, and it's not much fun." The Force Awakens is directed by J.J. Abrams. Lucas will not get a say in any of the new Disney-owned movies. I asked him about handing over the reins of the franchise he created.
The issue was, ultimately, they looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans. So I said, all I want to do is tell a story of what happened. You know, it started here and it went there, and it's all about generations, and it's about, you know, the issues of fathers and sons and grandfathers, and it's a family soap opera.
I am your father.
We call it space opera, but people don't realize it's actually a soap opera, and it's all about family problems and that. It's not about spaceships. So they decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to go do their own thing, and so I decided, fine. But basically, I'm not going to try to. They weren't that keen to have me involved anyway. But at the same time, I said, I'm not going to. If I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble, because they're not going to do what I want them to do. So, and I don't have the control to do that anymore. And all I would do is muck everything up. So I said, okay, I will go my way, and I'll let them go their way. And it really does come down to a simple rule of life, which is when you break up with somebody, the first rule is no phone calls. The second rule, you don't go over to their house and drive by to see what they're doing. Yes. The third one is you don't show up at their coffee shop or the things what you're going to run in. You just say, no, gone, history, I'm moving forward.
The momentum for the next Star Wars movie was fast and furious, with announcements coming out left and right. Disney talked to several directors, including Guillermo del Toro, David Fincher, and Brad Bird, before finally settling on a reluctant and skeptical J.J. Abrams, who initially didn't want to take the job because he was a fan of Star Wars and honestly just wanted to see it on the big screen. After he accepted, many were shocked. Abrams had just completed work on the second Star Trek movie, and now he was jumping into the Star Wars universe. Now, in what could be called a major victory for Disney and J.J. Abrams, they were able to land Lawrence Kasdan, the man responsible for the Empire Strikes Back screenplay, to write the script for Episodes 7, 8, and 9. I say major victory because Lucas approached Kasdan to work on the prequels and Kasdan declined. By early 2014, production on Star Wars Episode 7 had begun, in shooting locations around the world, including Iceland, Abu Dhabi, and Pinewood Studios in England. And the buzz was building. Reports were coming out that the movie was going to be filled with practical effects and miniature models instead of the CGI-heavy prequels. It was also announced that many of the original actors were back. Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, Peter Mayhew, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, just to name a few. Abrams also cast 3 relatively unknown actors to round out the new cast of characters, a move that was very similar to A New Hope. And in November 2014, more than a year before the release of Star Wars Episode 7, a teaser trailer was unleashed to the world, and to the amazement of millions, we watched 7 seconds of the Millennium Falcon cruise through the air. The fever was rising. I saw the teaser about 20 times in a 3-day period, and made the decision to try to avoid any other trailers leading up to the film's release. And holy shit, was that harder than it sounded. Now, as we got closer and closer to the film's release, it was nearly impossible to avoid the marketing blitz for Star Wars. It was everywhere. And when tickets went on sale in October 2015, I quickly purchased mine. But this time I didn't buy a second ticket for a second showing, because even with all the hype surrounding this movie, I was still worried. And the Phantom Menace had taught me to tread lightly. That's not to say I wasn't excited. I was. But also, I was prepared just in case. Because of my job, I wasn't able to get an early Thursday the 17th showing. And I'm sorry, but I'm almost 40, and I don't have it in me for midnight showings. Now, instead I opted for a 9 a.m. Friday morning ticket. Now, longtime listeners of the show know how I feel about opening day showings at theaters, but I was not going to let this movie be spoiled for me. I spent a year avoiding trailers, as much publicity as possible. I refused to watch interviews with cast and crew. I stayed away from YouTube videos with fan theories, and holy shit, those were everywhere. I only had one thing left to do: make it to the theater early and grab the only seat that mattered to me, the twosies. Now, you all know what I mean when I say the twosies. When you walk up the stairs, there's the main seating area, and then depending on which side of the theater you are, there's rows of just 2 seats. I take the twosies because I don't want anyone sitting next to me. I was not going to be sandwiched in between 2 people like I was flying coach on an airplane. I walked into the theater at 8 a.m., a full hour before the movie started, and as I rounded the corner, to my shock, the theater was almost full. I quickly scanned a row of twosies. Oh my God, those were almost full. I ran to the only open one I could see, sat down, took a deep breath. You made it. In my possession, I had a small soda and a medium popcorn, and I was ready to go. I reached into my pocket to get my phone. My pocket was empty. Oh man. I left my phone in my car. In my other pocket was the earbuds I was going to use, or my plan was to watch something on Netflix for an hour. Now I just have to sit there for an hour and do nothing. I couldn't get up. I couldn't go get it. My seat would be gone. Time slowed for that hour. Not having my phone on me meant I didn't know what time it was. When I felt like 30 minutes had gone by, I asked the person behind me if they had the time. 8:15, he told me. That's it. At what I presume was 9 a.m. The lights dimmed. And here's the thing. By the second trailer that was playing, people were still coming in. Groups of 4 or 5 people. I promise you that nowhere in this 300-seat theater were there 2 seats together, let alone 4 or 5. Now come on, people, plan ahead. I think 5 trailers played, and then the lights got even darker. The Lucasfilm logo came up on the screen. Sad to report, no 20th Century Fox drum intro, but a wave came over me. And then, bam! The Star Wars logo came on the screen, and I smiled instantly. The crawl started. I began to read when all of a sudden I was interrupted. "Excuse me," this woman said to me, "is that seat taking?" pointing to the one next to me that I've got my popcorn positioned on. She was standing practically in front of me. I was shifting left and right trying to read the crawl. I put my hands up. "Excuse me, I'm trying to read this. It's basically explaining what's happened over the past 30 years. Don't you understand?" She snapped at me and said, "Is that seat taken?" I shifted focus, stared right at her, and I said, "Why, yes, it is. I'm waiting for my girlfriend," which at the moment don't have, but she didn't know that. And I pointed. to the only empty seat I could see, which was very front row. She quickly turned and finally walked out of the view of the screen. I missed the fucking crawl. I had to go back online later on that day to read what it said. Now, to be honest with you, if she hadn't stood right in front of me and then snapped at me, I would have gladly given her my seat. I love the twosies. I love sitting by myself, but this was Star Wars and special circumstances applied. So, after a year of a self-imposed Star Wars blackout, what did I think about the movie? Well, you're going to have to wait until the next episode of How Is This Movie to find out. I'm going to have my friend Margot from the Book vs. Movie podcast on to discuss everything The Force Awakens. But if you really can't wait until then, here's a hint. I've seen the movie 3 times already and plan a 4th showing very soon. I'm going to leave you with these parting thoughts. Remember when I negotiated that day off from work? Well, I had to serve those 3 days as the dishwasher at the restaurant, and mid-shift the second day the dishwasher broke. But this was a restaurant, and the dishes had to be cleaned. All of a sudden I began hand-washing dishes, which took 5 times as long. I was soaked, cold, and kept mumbling to myself over and over again, "Fucking Jar Jar, fucking Jar Jar." My name is Dana Buckler, and thank you so much for listening.